Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in to our weekly stream where all the women, they're right here every week, every Wednesday night. They were getting lost. We found them and we put them here on YouTube. Some of you are watching on X, of course. If you are watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. I really appreciate it. I'm here with Mary Lou Singleton, as always, and we're very, very, very excited to have Jennifer Sey with us, who is our favorite.
You're my favorite. That's so lucky.
Convenient. So Jennifer, I feel like there's lots of good news from Jennifer, but one of the more exciting things that happened this week is that you've just launched this really cool athletic clothing line that is the only clothing line that's advocating female only sports. Is that how you put it? Why don't you explain it so that I don't screw it up?
It came to me, I don't know, maybe like 6 or 7 months ago. And it was sort of, my head, I was like immersed from having written my book and everything, and this idea of woke capitalism. And, all of these athletic brands out there, from Nike to Lulu and much smaller and, everything in between, they make much hay about championing women, female athletes. Women's History Month campaigns are happening right now. They make such a big deal, but in reality, I'll use Nike as an example. Nike is notorious for mistreating the actual women that work there and their paid endorsers. People like Allison Felix, who's written very publicly about this in the New York Times, young athletes like Mary Kane, who was abused in their running club, and the club was ultimately shut down for doping and abusing athletes. So, they do all these campaigns, but at the end of the day, they treat women with astonishing disrespect. And not a single athletic brand has stood up for female athletes and the protection of women's sports and spaces. So I thought, well, who better than me to, because I am also a former athlete. I was an elite gymnast in the 80s. I was the 1986 national champion. So that combined with my brand building and my willingness to say things that some other people aren't willing to say, just made me think there needs to be an athletic brand that stands up for women, that actually stands up for women's sports. So that's what it is. It's XX-XY Athetics, which is meant to just reflect the truth of the sex binary, because it's just true. It's not politics. It's not left. It's not right. It's just true. Yeah. And that's our mission is, we're the first and only brand to actually stand up for female athletes.
So have you sold out of everything yet?
We had a gangbuster couple of days. The first 2 days, I think we did what we had planned to do in the first 3 weeks in terms of the business. So, but we rushed, and we're getting stuff back in stock now. So you can find most things. Most things are available. But this first drop, as we call it in the fashion business, is cotton product. So it's not like workout gear. It's t-shirts, it's sweats, things like that. And then we're going to have leggings and performance fabrics coming in about a month and a half. So for the hardcore workout people, or just the people who like to wear leggings to their kids' soccer games on the weekend, that's all coming too. So
I love it. I'm so excited. Yeah. And it's not only like I was thinking when you were just talking about how, all these companies who like to big up their female athletes and claim to be promoting women's sports. And then there's people like Bethany Hamilton, who is totally thrown under the bus by Rip Curl. Because she actually stood up for female sports, for female athletes.
Right. She said males should not compete in women's surfing. And lo and behold, the contract, which had 3 years left and 6 figures on it, suddenly didn't exist anymore. we don't really know what happened. And then they hired trans surfer Sasha Lowerson as an endorser for female surfing, women's surfing. There's so many examples. There's Lulu examples. Nike obviously hired Dylan Mulvaney, to model sports bras, like of all things. Fine if you want to model sneakers, but sports bras actually serve a purpose for women.
Well, I mean, and those kinds of clothing, I mean, I think you know as well as anybody because you were the brand manager for Levi's for so long. But I mean, I like wearing men's clothing. I was like, women's clothing is made specifically for women, but men's clothing actually can be pretty unisex. Like I like men, like I wear men's shoes usually. I love men's t-shirts. Like often I feel like those clothes fit better. But when we're talking about athletic gear, like
bras,
yeah, specifically bras.
Yeah. I mean, this is not a t-shirt. And I agree with you. I wear men's jeans. I wear men's 501s. Having worked at Levi's for many, many years, I will tell you a lot of women wear men's 501s in particular. It's very popular. That's fine. This was a bra.
Yeah, exactly.
And Dylan Mulvaney, like this is not an athlete. Like this.
That too, Mary Lou. I mean, that's such a good point. I wrote that somewhere recently. Not an athlete, not a woman, no boobs.
Right.
None of the things.
None of the things. It was such a blatant just virtue signal. Anyway, it's just they don't, put their money where their mouth is. So we're going to do that. I mean, some people have asked us, well, what are you actually going to do to support women in sports besides just making product and selling it to us? I mean, people asked it nicely. There's a few things. One, I do actually think that brands can lead cultural movements to some extent. I mean, do you guys remember the first Dove Real Beauty campaign? Does anyone remember that? I mean, I actually pay a lot of attention to these things, but it was the first brand that actually showed real women. It mainstreamed body positivity before body positivity got to like the weird place it is now, when it was just like showing more realistic female body types. Nike, in a sense, mainstreamed the idea that we're all athletes and we have a body and we should work out and we should stay fit. I will tell you, from having been to China many times, before Lulu went to China, there were no yoga studios. So I actually think brands can kind of mainstream ideas in the culture in the same way that art and music and, it's a tool of culture. And I think that we can normalize for women. I think, as you know, there's a lot of women talking to their girlfriends at home who are too afraid to stand up and say anything. But if you see this cool brand with great content and, I think it can normalize it, and you can get people to kind of come out of the shadows and kind of say, yes, I agree with this. Women's sports should be protected. So that's the first thing. We also are partnering with Icons on a t-shirt, and some proceeds will go to support and fund their lawsuit against the NCAA, which just happened, I think, last week. 12 athletes led by Riley Gaines. And we've got some other fun things in the mix because we want to, I think a lot of I believe these athletes who are thrown into unfair competition with males, they need to not compete. They need to say, we're not going to do this, but they're afraid of losing scholarships and sponsorships. And so we'd like to help in that regard. So more coming soon on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's less likely to make a splash if just one woman decides not to compete, but everyone else will, and she just kind of loses out and nothing changes. Right. But the more women that come out and feel like they can sort of band together on this, they can actually make a huge impact. I mean, look at the impact that Riley Gaines is making.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, and
stand out. I mean, poor thing. Yeah, she's a very young woman still. Yeah. I mean, she'll even talk about it. It took her a moment to gather herself after, they told her, you tied, but you must stand down and Leah gets the trophy. I mean, they chose wokeness over women in this particular instance. And I think it took her quite some time to gather herself and say, no. And we need women to do it in the moment.
Her story is, she's so inspiring. And then that piece of these two elite athletes tying to the fraction of a second, it makes me feel like there's some benevolent female force in the universe. Like propping her up, to have this be the case to show people what's happening here. Because what are the odds of that? As an athlete, like what are the odds of tying in a swimming competition? I've never heard of that happening before.
Yeah, it's definitely unusual. It's
Right.
definitely unusual. And, I have to call out Paula Scanlon, who's also featured in our campaign.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a teammate of Leah Thomas's, and she expressed her concerns about having to share a locker room. She was a victim of sexual assault at 16. She was not comfortable sharing a locker room with Leah, and the university told her to seek counseling.
Right. It's so weird because it's not like, it certainly doesn't seem like it. And you would assume this if you had any brains, that propping up, somebody like Dylan Mulvaney or, inserting some other man into your campaign for women's sports or women's sports gear, like that wouldn't be successful. Like what female athlete is looking at that and being like, oh yeah, this is a brand that I want to support or align myself with?
Well, I think that in many instances, if we look at Bud Light, right, which is obviously the most egregious example and the most successful example of a boycott, because they don't usually work or last. I did not think that would last.
Right.
We had the left boycott, New Balance, back when the New Balance CEO said he was, sort of psyched that Trump was president. He thought it would be good for domestic manufacturing. You had liberals in Brooklyn burning their New Balances. And that same year, the company grew 7.5%. So I don't know, they burned them and then bought a new pair, because those are the people wearing New Balance, right? But I think they get in this bubble, like what on earth could have prompted Bud Light to make this choice? But they're in a bubble. They don't understand their consumer. We know that that head of marketing just a few days before was on a podcast expressing total disdain for the actual consumer base of Bud Light, wanting a new consumer base. And they just live in this bubble, and all their friends agree with them or pretend to agree with them. And I think they just have lost sight of how cuckoo it all is, and that it is not appealing to most people. And that what is really offensive to people, which is the case of Bud Light, is not necessarily that you'd hire a trans person, but that you're forcing people to accept a lie, that there is no difference between male and female bodies, that if you say you're a woman, you're a woman. Like, that's what people are rejecting.
Right.
Well, and Mulvaney in particular feels to me like psychological warfare against women. That particular phenomenon is so egregious and so over the top offensive that it feels almost like the new iteration of the witch burnings or something, of how can we break the spirits of the women. So depressing.
It is. Well, it's just, that video. Did you see that
Yes.
video? Oh my
and I did see quite a few women critiquing it, like, hey, I thought we, that's not what feminism's about.
Is this the one where it's like what it means to be a girl, and he's like he's doing a walk of shame and stuff like that?
Yes. Right.
As if all these heterosexual men are clamoring to sleep with him. Sorry. Like, give me a break.
That's what it is to be a woman, wearing lipstick and having, I don't know, sex you feel bad about later. Not exactly how I define my womanhood. It's just sort of an insult. I think, like, nobody cared however many years ago, when it's this idea that we have to agree that trans women are women and there is no difference, and there are no differences between male and female bodies. That article in The Atlantic, which I'm sure you're both aware of, the Maggie Mertens one from like a year and a half ago. Can I read a quote from it?
Which one? Please. Yeah, go for it.
It was called, I think it was in 2022, by Maggie Mertens, and the title was "Separating Sports by Sex Doesn't Make Sense." And here's a line in the article. This is written by someone who obviously has never played sports or done a sport in her life. "Maintaining the binary in sports reinforces the idea that boys are bigger, stronger, and faster, a notion that's been challenged for years." By who?
Well, it's been written, so it has, I guess.
And And she went on, she didn't say who challenged it.
Who challenged it?
Unbelievable.
How did we get here? It's so insane. I have all these theories. One is,
okay, what is it?
Well, all families, because I think no one has siblings anymore. And I think a lot of us who had brothers remember that distinct moment when suddenly your brother was so much stronger than you were. Like he went through puberty and you couldn't beat him up anymore. And you couldn't he could, just completely overpower you in arm wrestling now. And it just happened overnight. So I think that's one of it is we've lost that sibling sense of male and female. Kids don't roughhouse at all, like the safety culture around childhood and the constant hovering. Kids don't roughhouse together. Like my generation, we ran in packs of children, and you knew the boys were stronger, especially at a certain age, because there was a lot of physical play going on and a lot of physical activity happening. And then I do think, again, the psychological damage done by the female superhero trope of this tiny, anorexic, 89-pound bikini-clad woman able to toss the Hulk across the room. And that programming getting into our young people's minds from really early on in their development.
Well, and I think a lot of people would say that feminism is at fault, and I don't think they're entirely wrong. Obviously, I don't like to blame feminism for the phenomenon of like autogynephilic men claiming to be women, but there was like a faction of feminism, modern feminism, really, that said that there's no who contested the idea of a male brain and a female brain, and I understand why, but there is such a thing as a male brain and there is such a thing as a female brain. And, push this idea, feminists, like I'm a feminist and I didn't, but I know that feminists out there were offended by the idea that like Serena Williams couldn't beat a man at tennis, for example. Like, how dare you say that women are weak, as though it's an insult instead of like a reality. So there was that.
Yeah, there was a piece written about, it was in some dumb blog. It wasn't even where I didn't even know what it was, but about our brand launch. And she said, this idea that we have to protect girls from these big, strong boys that are faster and stronger. It's like, no one says we need protection. We just want to be able to compete on an even playing field. I actually think there's a separate sort of cultural force at play, which is like this idea of normalizing everything, normalizing, it's at odds with the idea that everyone has a mental illness, and that, it creates clout in the world, right? To sort of confess and flaunt your mental illness. And on the other hand, it's like, if you're a junkie, don't be ashamed, just use safely. Here's some needles. And if you're having delusions because you're having a bipolar episode, you just experience the world differently. I mean, there was an article that said that, I don't know, like a year ago in the New York Times. So, because I was going to say, nobody minded 10 years ago when this idea of gender dysphoria was considered a disorder. And there are some trans people that say, I have a disorder. I feel more comfortable presenting as the opposite sex. It's this idea that if you say you're a woman, you are a woman. And when you grant that, then of course you don't have separate sports and separate spaces. And the idea that underpins that then, which is a total lie, and I just refuse to further any lie, is that male and female bodies are no different.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a murky spectrum. No one can really say. It's just this murky spectrum. Except everyone, yeah. Totally. I'll go to medical conferences and hear about the murky spectrum of gender, but interestingly, no one's accidentally putting IUDs in male urethras, right? Like, it's just everyone knows what male and female is, but we're this gaslighting, this horrible mind contamination that's happening. It's amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And it seems to me the most blatant example of kind of being told you must further a lie. I mean, for me, within COVID, I obviously was unwilling to do that. The lies were just, everywhere. The lie that everyone was at equal risk, that Zoom school was school, that you're a horrible, selfish person if you don't like living in your room for 18 months as a 16-year-old. I mean, the lies just went on and on and on. But this, to me, everybody knows, to your point, that men and women are different and that there are two sexes. Everybody knows this. And the insistence that that is not the case and you must get in line and you must say it, or you're a very bad alt-right fascist, Nazi. I was also called a Nazi today. I love being called a Nazi as a Jewish person.
Naturally.
I don't have the logo tee on. I have this one on right now. But the logo is XXXY, and somebody commented that it looked like swastikas, which is the stupidest thing I've ever like a swastika, it looks like an X. But anyway, it just seems the most blatant example to me of being told you must say a lie.
Yeah, I mean, it's super creepy, and it's so, I think on some level or on a big level, they all know that they're lying and full of shit also, because it's like when you say men's bodies and women's bodies are biologically different, they'll switch to, oh, well, like we're talking about gender, not sex. Don't you know the difference between sex and gender? I'm like, yes, I do. Do you? Because you keep saying men are literally women and that it's fine for a man to identify as female. And then you claim that you're differentiating between gender and sex and that I'm the big idiot for not understanding that.
Yeah, I think the other interesting aspect of it is I think it's largely furthered by sort of, a far left atheist cohort, of which I would have considered myself to be a part of until, pretty recently. Yes, and yet I don't know how you could explain what they're saying other than a gendered soul. I mean, it's a soul, and yet there are these atheists, but like, I feel like a woman, I don't have a uterus, I don't have ovaries, I don't have a vagina, I don't have boobs, I don't have any of those things, but I feel like I'm a woman. That's a soul that they're describing. Is it not?
Yeah, I mean, it's very religious. The whole thing is very religious. It's a faith-based religion. It's about believing and not questioning. And if you question, you're a heretic and you need to be shunned, right?
Yeah, I have never been a big fan of religion, but I actually feel like these new fandangled ideas are worse.
Yeah, I think so too. For anyone watching, I just want to let you guys know, or anybody who will be listening to the audio in the future, that the website for XX-XY Athletics is XX-XY Athletics.com. This is Jennifer's new clothing line that understands the difference between men and women.
Right there, we have a cute little vanity URL. So if you go to thetruthfits.com, you can get there. Nice. That's a little easier to remember.
Nice. Okay, awesome. And also for anybody watching on YouTube, if you have questions for Jennifer or us, then please use the live chat. Please actually use the super chat. I probably won't. I can't pay super close attention to the live chat, but if you use the super chat, I'll see it. And yeah, so I mean, so beyond this line that you just launched, which I'm actually curious how much, like when you started thinking about doing this, did you get a lot of support, or did you kind of find it hard to get support? I don't really know much about that process, but I know you wrote a little bit about how, what the response to you has been like on your Substack.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest sort of hurdle for me to get over emotionally, I think, was I never wanted to run a startup. I mean, I sort of liked working in a company. I didn't want to have to figure out like benefits and, I don't know. I didn't want to figure out any of that stuff. Like I like to do what I do, which is make great product and market and build a brand, but I didn't want to do all that stuff. But I was interviewing during the last 2 years for new jobs, and it was just a terrible experience. And I realized I couldn't go back to that world. I couldn't be told, you're doing it wrong, you're talking too fast, you don't understand women, are you ashamed about what you did and what you said? Please bend a knee and then we might let you come work here. I went through one interview process. It was like 10 interviews. It was for a CEO job. So it was a lot of rounds, and it was fine the whole way through. It was like, we just talked about the functional skill set and expertise and what I'd done. And the last person was an HR person. And her first question was, do you regret what you've done? And I said, no. And that I just was like, I can't do that.
Yeah.
For anyone, corporate America has been sort of taken over by HR, and you spend so much time in, DEI and sexual harassment training, and you learn everybody's terrified that they're going to say the wrong word, and everybody's walking on eggshells all the time. And I just didn't want that anymore. And so I met someone here who was interested in starting a clothing brand, who had the money to do it. He had an idea that for sort of a non-woke apparel brand, but the idea wasn't very good. So I said, well, give me a few weeks and let me come up with a better idea. So I have a partner. We co-founded this together. He loved the idea I came up with. And the thing I thought would be the hardest was finding people to work on it, because the business fashion is, I'm going to use woke as a shorthand. I don't love it, but that's what we have, right? You know what I'm saying when I say that. I was like, I'll never find a designer. I'll never find it. But I did. People, I think people want permission to kind of join this and say true things and call out the bullshit. So, my team is small. It's like 5 of us, and we all do everything. Half of them were at the warehouse today putting zippers on the sweatshirts. Like, we are in it. But to me, it's so much fun, because the other thing I didn't want to do anymore is, when you get to a very senior level as an executive in a company, you spend a lot of time in boardrooms, just like talking about who you're going to lay off next. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't want to do that anymore. I wanted to make something that was mine. So I decided to do that at 55, which is not where I thought I'd be at this point or at this age, but I'm having a blast.
That's awesome. Congratulations.
That's really inspiring. I say that in the true sense, like it's inspiring to watch someone inspired, it's like you live by truth, and that's a really wonderful thing to see.
Yeah. Okay. So you're also working on a documentary that's called Generation COVID, which also, this is obviously completely connected to the reason that you resigned from Levi's way back when, and these questions that these HR people are asking you. So can you tell us a little bit about that project?
Well, yes, I'd love to talk about the movie. I produced a documentary before called Athlete A, which folks can watch on Netflix. And that's really about Larry Nassar, the doctor for USA Gymnastics that abused over 500 athletes. But it's not just about him. It's actually about the culture that kind of allowed for him to do that for 30 years, because widespread. I hope it's getting better. So I made that film, and I just believe in the power of film and documentary in particular to get people to think about things differently, maybe than they had in the past. And so I wanted to just tell the stories of the kids. I want all the people that were so fervent about needing for the schools to be closed. I want them to see and hear from the actual kids who suffered, and whose, in some instances, lives were forever changed. So there's about 10 kids and families featured from across the United States. And we touch on the full range of issues, from learning loss to weight gain to having dropped out of high school and not graduating, not having sports for 2 years in high school, and therefore not getting that college scholarship that a kid maybe from a low-income family was counting on. Mental health. One young woman was hospitalized. We have another family who lost a child to suicide. So we wanted to kind of touch on the full range of issues and have people have to sit and listen and hear it from the kids themselves. It's not intended to be political. I don't think kids ever should have been politicized. I just want to open people's hearts a little bit. And when you hear the stories, I don't know how you can't at least maybe reassess your priors on it, even if you were really, really, really for school closures, because these kids have suffered so. So that's the goal. We're in editing mode. We finished filming. So we should have a rough cut in, I don't know, maybe a month. I have a partner. His name is Andrew James, and we're making it together. We're directing it together, producing it together. So I think it's going to be amazing. It is really sad. I will say that. And I don't feel that hopeful. I mean, I'd love to leave you all with hope at the end of the film, but I don't feel like we've learned our lesson, and I feel like it can happen again. And that's the really scary part to me. We haven't done the introspection necessary.
Why do you think that we haven't learned our lesson?
Do you guys think we've learned our lesson?
No, I'm just curious. I mean, I don't know. I think that the people committed to, pretending as though this was all necessary, that all the lockdowns are necessary, that the mandates were necessary, or the people who are claiming that, oh, well, we didn't know, and the science changed, and now we know, and now we can announce that maybe actually the school closures weren't all that good, and I guess the vaccine didn't stop the spread. I mean, these people aren't acknowledging what happened and why it was wrong. So no, I don't think that those people learned their lesson. I do at the same time think, I was just curious to know what you thought, but like, I think that for a large group of people, which is great, people no longer trust the authorities and trust the experts and trust the government and trust the media, which, we never should have trusted all these people to begin with. But I did. I always trusted the government up until, a few years ago or whatever. And I, probably up until 5 or 10 years ago, trusted the media. The gender identity stuff really changed a lot of things for me. And then the COVID stuff changed a lot of things for me even more. And then I was kind of just done with it all. So there's a huge group of people now who I think don't trust and are committed to freedom and are really watching their rights, our constitutional rights in Canada, watching civil liberties in a way that we weren't before. And that, includes me. But then, of course, there's this whole population of people who don't want to admit how badly they screwed up.
Yeah. I mean, there's a few things I would say. The headlines are everywhere now. In the New York Times, startling learning loss. There's nothing startling about it. If you had half a brain and you weren't, riddled with fear and you stayed calm amidst the storm, then you could read the data and you could have known from the beginning that lockdowns were going to be devastating and that school closures were absurd because we were not all at equal risk and children were never at risk. And you don't have to think too hard. If you know the population in an urban public school, that a lot of these kids were going to be left home alone, very young children left alone. I mean, whatever, I don't need to recount all of it. But there were a lot of lies. So, but now the headlines are, oh my gosh, the startling learning loss is so terrible, but there's no acknowledgement from these outlets like the New York Times and CNN that you participated. You furthered the fear. They act now like they're journalists. Yeah. They're like doing journalism now. And you're like, Apoorva, the science reporter for the New York Times, I mean, all she did for 2 years was write fear-mongering lies.
Absolutely. And it trickled into every aspect of the Times. It was in the science, the style section. It was in the entertainment section, like the COVID propaganda. They were an instrument of propaganda at the forefront of this. They didn't just play a small role. In the Ethicist, I remember reading the Ethicist every week, and every week it was, should I narco my neighbor for having people over when there's a lockdown, or how can I force my housekeeper to get a vaccine?
Right. Yeah. I mean, CNN had a death ticker.
Yes.
I mean, a death ticker for at least a year and a half. So there's no acknowledgement. And I really hold a special place in my heart, not a good one, for the journalists that failed to interrogate these issues. Journalists were propagandists. They printed Pfizer and CDC press releases as if that was doing journalism. And that's their whole job, is to hold power to account. And now they're pretending that it never happened. And, they're like on their fainting couch with the learning loss. And so without the introspection and we got it wrong, we panicked, we shouldn't have. So that's the press. I do agree with you. There's a cohort of people, Megan, who maybe, bought in the beginning and then their eyes were opened and they're pretty introspective about it and they won't let that happen again. I just don't know if it's a big enough group of people that it would never happen again. And then the last part I would say is for the folks that made these decisions, and, I'll cite Gavin Newsom, who was the governor of the state I lived in. That was the state locked down the hardest, schools closed the longest. You have Fauci, you have Randy Weingarten, the head of the AFT, the teachers union. They're all going like this. They're all going, I had nothing to do with it. I didn't close the schools.
Of course.
I followed the recommendation from public health. Public health says, we just made a recommendation. Like, who did it then?
I know.
Because as far as I know, and they all say, they had nothing to do with it. No one advised and advocated that public schools should be closed. Okay, then why was I dragged across the internet for saying they should be open? It doesn't even make any sense. So I just don't think there's been I can't think of the word. My brain's a little fried. It's been a long 2 days. There's just not been a real reckoning. I think it will happen, but I think it's got to be new people, new journalists on the beat. Like they're not going to out themselves as having failed. And my general feeling is the people who were super aggro about lockdown, you need to lock down forever. They're feeling the most you can get from them is they might say, well, we might have been wrong, but we were wrong for the right reasons. And you, Jennifer, and all your people, you might have been right, but it's for the wrong reasons. So you're still a very bad person.
You're still a grandma killer, or you at least tried to be.
You're a racist and a eugenicist and an ableist.
Yeah.
Right. Those are the only reasons you spoke out the way you did.
Right.
Certainly wasn't because you cared about children.
Right.
Or could see the glaring inconsistencies in the propaganda or any of those reasons. It's just because you're bad and bad people wanted that. I want a Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Part of me wants vengeance. I'm so angry about it, but I don't know how that would help in the long run.
I mean, the one thing I will say, so I was, I think the first actual gymnast to speak out about the abuse in the sport. And I know that I was. It was in 2008. It was my first book. It was called Chalked Up. And I was dragged for a full 10 years by the entire gymnastics community, the athlete community, the Olympic community, because this is before me too. So you were not supposed to call out respected men because they were respected coaches for doing bad things. You were supposed to just shut up and take it because their reputations were more important than your well-being.
Right.
But after 10 years, I was redeemed. Because the truth does eventually out in the end. And the frustrating part is upon redemption, everybody pretended that they'd always been on my side, which I think is what will happen in the COVID scenario too. But so I trust and I believe the truth does out in the end. I just think that took 10 years from when I first talked about it until, Larry Nassar went to prison for life. So these things take time. And like I said, the people responsible are not going to implicate themselves. Let's be honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think that the truth always does come out in the end, but then people get away with it, right? And people aren't held accountable. Like, I don't think that Justin Trudeau is going to suffer really. I would love it if he did, but I don't think that he is going to be actually held accountable in any genuine way for what he did during COVID and what he did to the convoy.
No,
he's not going to win the next election, but he's in for 3 terms, so who cares? And I'm sure he's going to make off great once he's out of there.
Yeah, I don't think Gavin will either. I feel like Gavin's waiting for his chance to run. He's waiting for Biden to tip over and step in and take his place. So, I don't think Fauci will be held accountable. I do think many years from now, his rep. I don't know. Maybe I just am I believe that good and right out to the end. And I think ultimately his reputation will be in tatters. It might be after he's dead, but somebody will expose that. I think.
Well, and now we have this Supreme Court case, this Murthy versus Biden, which is so chilling that the doctors who were at the forefront of speaking truth about this and really explaining what public health policy should look like and to really address this are, were censored by the government. And it looks like the Supreme Court is going to continue to give that power to the government. So I don't know, how hopeful I am about any help on that front.
I know that I found very frustrating. I'm a little behind on my reading on it, but I am aware that one of the Supreme Court justices, the newest one, Ketanji Brown Jackson, made a statement that the government was shackled by the First Amendment.
Hamstring says, help me out here. Says something like, help me out here. It sounds like you think the First Amendment is meant to hamstring the government.
That's right. I got that. You're correct.
That is what the First Amendment is supposed to do, right?
Yeah.
Right.
How do you not know that? So that was disconcerting and alarming. I know. I don't know. We'll see what happens. But yeah, it is. It's very scary. I do think, in the very beginning, the very early days of COVID, there were so few of us that we all found each other fast. And now there's a lot more people. And I think you might be right, Megan. I don't know. Maybe people won't put up with it again. I'm not sure they could get away with it again to the degree.
I mean, it's been like, I've been really inspired by Canadians, which I never thought would happen. Because Canadians are so notoriously passive and polite and everything's fine. Wait, what's going on? Well, just check the CBC, right? But the way that the convoy rose up and changed everything has translated now into people, families, parents fighting for women and girls' spaces and pushing back against gender identity ideology being taught in schools. And people are really becoming quite fearless. And I think that this stemmed, I wish that it happened differently, but it didn't. Like, this didn't come from those of us who were fighting gender identity ideology for so many years and fighting for women's sex-based rights and fighting to protect women's spaces. I think it came from the convoy. These people that I've connected with and been working with in Canada, who are wonderful people, these are freedom people, came from the freedom movement and then saw what was happening in schools with SOGI, which is the sexual orientation, inclusion, gender identity, whatever they're teaching kids about, that boys might be girls in school. And they were being excluded from decision making around that. Kids were being socially transitioned at school and parents weren't being informed. And then the parents were being treated like criminals because they wanted to know or because they didn't think this was right.
US, yeah.
So, I think that that whole situation around COVID and then the pushback and working class people in particular getting really angry at the way that they were being treated and vilified and talked about in the media and talked about by politicians that, made everybody kind of be like, screw you, no, we're not going along with anything anymore.
I don't feel like that's quite happened here in the US. I don't know. Although there's things are like it's like 52 pickup, the card game. There's all sorts of allegiances and alliances are fractured. I mean, I think the war in the Middle East has really opened people's eyes in a lot of ways, and the anti-Semitism that we're seeing on the left, I think, is for a lot of Jewish people who are traditionally Democrats. Many are saying, I mean, I'm Jewish and I know many people are saying I'm a single issue voter now around Israel. So that's a fracturing of, apart. It's a very small percentage of people, but everything's all mixed up now. And you see in the US that, I mean, I think Black men are lining up to vote for Trump in ways they never have before, to vote for the Republican Party. So I don't know, maybe it's changing more than I realized, but I don't think we had an event like what you're talking about.
Right.
Just sort of activated people.
I mean, it I mean, it's interesting because it's definitely, like in Canada, it's definitely a working class movement, and it's a movement that was started by and is being continued by people who are not being represented by their political representatives and who are not being represented in the media. And I think, that's a phenomenon that we see in the US too, in terms of, there's a war on the working class in the US too. Obviously, Batya just wrote a book about this, but and it's not, but it's like it's happening in rural places. Like the people that I know in what?
Thanks.
Oh,
every time.
Oh, I didn't even notice. Like, I just talked to a friend back in Vancouver, and she's like, I have no one to talk to, like, and nobody, and the two people that I can talk to feel like we're the only people that can, like, I can't say what I think. You can't talk about anything. So it's still like that in these urban centers and these Vancouver is particularly bad, but I'm sure there's lots of people who feel like that in, Toronto and Montreal and so on and so forth. So it does depend on where you are, but I mean, it's just for Canada, it seems like, oh, wow. Like it's hard to tell how many, if how much of the population is feeling this way, but I get the impression that it's a lot. But in America, there's been a fight for freedom and free speech all along that hasn't really existed in Canada before.
That's true. Yeah, I don't know. I feel a little bit unmoored. Like I mean, if you just look at the presidential candidates, I don't know how anybody could want to vote for either one of them. It's ridiculous and embarrassing. That's the best we could do.
It's more of that demoralization campaign. It feels like we're in a psychological war on so many levels.
Yeah. And there's so many issues at play, but I think you're right, Megan. I think the same thing is happening here. Especially when you look at people are realigning party by party and who they're going to vote for. And it is driven by, I think, the working class, and people are tired of being told what to think by sort of, elites and academics who hold luxury beliefs, to, use Rob Henderson's terminology. They're tired of it. They're like, that doesn't reflect my life. I mean, closed schools, that was a luxury belief, right? That was not feasible for a working class person.
Stay home.
And stay home. I mean, it was trickle-down epidemiology, which is what, Dr. Jay Bhattacharya calls it. It's true. It was never going to work. The only people that it could work for are the very, very wealthy. It was never going to work. And look, I am well off. I had a long career as an executive. So, I'm not trying to misrepresent who I am, but I also sent my kids to public school, and I lived in the city, and I had friends from all walks of life. And I knew that this was unworkable. I don't even think you needed to know if you have any imagination, but I will tell you, the very wealthy, hid out in their, gated communities and sent their kids to private school while telling everybody else to stay home. Gavin Newsom's children were in school.
So the private schools remained open in California
They opened in the fall. So they were just closed for a few months in spring. The private schools all opened by fall.
And how long were the public schools closed?
Until the very next fall. So the public schools did not open until September 2021. So kids lost a full year and a half of school.
Jeez.
Were you the only executive at Levi's with children in public school that you knew of?
I think I'm the only executive in America that had children in public school.
That's what. And you moved to Colorado for your kids to have more freedom. Is that correct?
Well, we moved to Colorado. So I have two older children. They're 20 and 23. And then I have two younger children, 9 and 7. And at the time, my now 9-year-old was in kindergarten, and he was starting school, but he was on Zoom, a 6-year-old. And he was in a Spanish language school. So he's learning in his second language, and he speaks Spanish quite well, but on the computer, he's like, it's the sad. I mean, I have these pictures of him sitting in front, of the computer, like they have to wave, and I just did not want that to be his first experience of school. I wanted him to like school. I wanted him to be excited about going to school and getting an education. And by December of 2020, it seemed very clear that the San Francisco public schools would not open in the spring. The Board of Ed was intransigent. It just wasn't going to happen. I mean, I went to every school board meeting. Like, it was just not going to happen. And so my husband and I got really frustrated, and we called a school in Denver. It's a public school. And we said, can we come to your school? And they said, you can come Monday. It was a Thursday. They said, come on over. So we got on a plane with our backpacks and we went to an Airbnb, and our kids started school. It was all very up in the air. Like, we didn't know where we were going to live. We didn't know if we were going to go back. But I have to say, I can never go back to San Francisco. I hate those people.
That's how I feel about Vancouver. Like, people kept expecting me to come back, I think. And then I was like, no, I don't ever want to go back. When I go back to Canada now, I go over to the island, to the forest with my truck and my dogs. I have zero interest in being in Vancouver. I hate it.
we would jump playgrounds were closed and for 10 months. Playgrounds, outdoor playgrounds. We had an apartment in San Francisco with a patio this big out back. Like, where are you supposed to take your kids to play? We would jump the fence and people would call the police on us.
Oh, God.
When we were first allowed to go have a picnic outside in the park, it was like July of 2020. We were permitted to be in the park, single households. They had all these like crazy rules, and you had to be sitting in these hula hoops that they put in the park to make sure you were spaced. Anyway, I have 4 kids. There were 6 of us in the park. And my 2 older children are mixed race, so we don't even look necessarily all alike. Somebody called the cops on us that we were 2 households mixing. Never gonna see these people again.
Did you tell them they were racists?
I wanted to. I said to my husband, I was like, look at that woman over there. She's texting the number. There was like a number. If you see something, say that you were told to tell on your neighbors. And, lo and behold, 2 minutes later, the cops came up to us and asked us to prove that we all lived in one house.
Gross.
So I don't want to be around those people.
No, the snitch lines and the people who access them, it's like, how can you ever trust them again? Ever. It would take so much of a song and dance on their part, and a expression of I need to see their thought process of how they've thought about why they behave that way, and explaining to me how they're never going to behave that way again to even consider.
Apology. I am ashamed of my behavior. I was afraid. I let them get to me. The narrative got to me. I wasn't thinking clearly. I am ashamed. I could actually forgive that. But that's not what anyone's doing. I mean, I lost 95% of my friends. So I don't want to be around those people. It's just San Francisco, probably like Vancouver. I don't know. I haven't been there. My husband has family there. So
it's similar politically, for sure.
Similar politically. And I moved to San Francisco in the early 90s, and it was the most amazing place on the planet. It was like filled with weirdos. And I always tell people, if you ever felt like a weirdo, it was the place for you. And it has become a place of such aggressive conformity that I can't bear to be around any of those people. I was there a couple weeks ago, and I just wanted to get out the whole time.
People in Vancouver are just all scared of one another, and they're so afraid of being kicked out of the clique, like they're very attached to social status, which I have zero respect for. I don't care about social status, like I care about my friends, I care about my relationships, but like in as far as like fitting in with certain people because these people are like high status for whatever reason, I do not give a fuck. And like, you're going to stay silent about something as important as this just so this person doesn't stop being friends with you. Like, how can anybody feel safe around that kind of person? You're obviously going to throw me under the bus or narc on me or whatever,
to maintain your standing. San Francisco has other issues. I mean, all those things, yes. It has the lowest percentage of children of any city in America.
Wow.
And they have the lowest of the children that do live there, the lowest percentage in public school. There's still a large number. I mean, it's still 50,000 kids in public school, but it's a bunch of, rich people, very rich, very young Google millionaires,
Right.
who maybe not that young. They wait really long to have kids, and then they have one child, and then they helicopter parent that child to death and send them to private schools and keep them cordoned off from the real world. Like they raise them like veal in a pen and yell at everybody about how they're supposed to be and what they're supposed to believe. Like, these are not my people.
No. And these are also the people, I mean, what I find about progressives in Vancouver is that they consider themselves to be very well informed. I mean, they're educated, but that's not the same as being well informed about the real world, or understanding what's going on out in the real world. So they consider themselves to be very worldly, and then consider everybody essentially who disagrees with them politically and ideology to be stupid and ignorant, which, I think that situation is similar in the US, where, like, anybody who doesn't see things their way is just stupid, so they can just scoff at them, and they still see themselves as very inclusive, good people who are invested in, supporting the marginalized and invested in diversity and so forth. And there's like zero connection between the fact that everybody that they know and spend time with is exactly like they are.
Well, and they're not actually invested in supporting the marginalized. The night I met my now husband, my second husband, I told him a story, and he almost didn't believe it. He believes me now, about a woman who asked me where my children went to school. And these are my grown children. At the time, they were in elementary school in San Francisco, public elementary school. And I told her what the school was called. It was called New Traditions Elementary. And she said, "Good God, I would not send my dog there." Like, they don't actually want to be of the people. They just, it's all just this like, they drive their Teslas, these like sealed chambers to work, and they park in the underground garage, and they're not on the bus or the subway or at the bodega or any of it. They don't actually interact with people different than themselves ever.
Right.
Ever. And they don't like them. San Francisco is also very aloof. I mean, I've been very struck by the fact that in Denver, everybody's very friendly. In San Francisco, everybody's like better than you, so they won't talk to you. There's no hi, or there's no sort of collegiality on the street. There's just no friendliness. It's just mean.
That's what Vancouver is famously like, is very cold and mean. And I didn't recognize it really until I left, because I was part of the clique, because I'm from Vancouver and I grew up in Vancouver. So I already knew everybody in Vancouver and I already had my friends. So why would I want new friends? And we were like, why would we want to associate with somebody not from Vancouver? Gross. But I did grow up working class. I grew up working class, but I went to like a middle/upper class school because we lived in a co-op in the area. So we got to go to good schools. And in Canada, there isn't actually such a huge discrepancy between the schools. Like they're pretty consistent across the board. Most people go to public schools. Most kids go to public schools, and most of them are not that bad. Some of them might be a bit better, and the neighborhood's better and whatever. But, I didn't, like, once I left and once I started meeting people who were different than me and not from Vancouver, and everybody was telling me, oh, like, Vancouver is so cold and elitist and nobody will talk to you and you can't make any friends, I could see it, and it became very unattractive to me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I fell in love with San Francisco when I moved there in the early 90s. And I had moved around a lot as a kid from my gymnastics and training. I moved gym to gym. And so I never had a sense of place. And I got to San Francisco in 1992. And I just felt home in a way that I never had. And it was filled with weirdos. It didn't matter if you were a hippie or a punk rocker or a raver or whatever you were. It was like, it was all fine. Everybody was coming out, and that's when people still came out. And I'm told they don't do that anymore. My kids tell me you don't come out anymore. But it was really hard. It changed dramatically. I mean, there was first tech boom, second tech boom. It just sort of became very much a one industry town. Everybody was trying to sell their app or their whatever, and everybody was trying to get rich and did get rich. And then you had all these young Google millionaires, and it completely changed the face of the city. You couldn't afford to live there if you were an artist or a teacher or a police officer. And it, you know, it just became so boring and obnoxious. But I couldn't let go of what I thought it was, you know, and then COVID just, you know, blew that up for me. And it kind of brought it all to bear, you know, because it's just a bunch of rich people yelling at everybody to do what they think is right, and virtue signaling by staying home and watching Netflix while people are suffering.
Yeah.
And downloading their perceived risk onto the people bringing them their food while they're watching Netflix. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's just a really, I don't know. I'm disgusted by the mindset, and I don't want to be around people like that who pretend to know what's best for everyone and feel so justified in their righteousness that they will treat people with utter cruelty, because that's exactly what happened, you know.
And claim to be the compassionate ones.
Right.
Right.
But they get to be the good people because they're so right and they're so righteous. Their cause is so righteous that it justifies any degree of cruelty, any amount of cruelty.
Oh, yeah.
It's grotesque. I don't want to be around those people. And I will say Colorado it's Democrat now. It's blue. It didn't used to be, but Jared Polis, who's our governor, has definitely turned it blue. But it has this like go West young man libertarian streak to it that I actually like. Like, people pretty much live and let live here, which
I think it's like a truly purple state. It's really is an interesting place politically like that. It's not as polarized. Are most of the families in your documentary from California, or are they from across the country?
Across the country. We have New York, Connecticut, Oregon, which was as bad as California. We have one family in Florida with a special needs child. I'm forgetting. We do have we have one family in a town called Greeley, Colorado, which is like an immigrant community here in Colorado with a large Latino population. 2 cousins who actually dropped out of high school and then eventually came back. It's actually sort of an uplifting story, but we try to cover all bases. So it's across the country. We missed the Midwest, I think, but we got East, West, Pacific Northwest, Florida, South. So yeah, try to represent all the different ways. I mean, it was interesting when I started making it. I thought we were going to do a California versus Florida. It would sort of show that, you know, the kids who went back to school sooner, because DeSantis opened the schools in August of 2020, and we would show the contrast. But what we learned, because I probably interviewed 200 families to get to the 10 that are in the film, the kids in Florida weren't doing that great either. Because it wasn't just school. I mean, you have to also remember, when they did go back in 2021, it was so disrupted and fucked up, frankly, right? Because the kids were masked, they had to be distanced, they had to eat outside, they had silent lunches. Like, it was a miserable experience. So, you know, I would argue that the year they went back was also a lost year. It was a wasted year.
Right.
Oh, absolutely. And yeah, to be masked the whole time, the isolation, the children in my practice would come and tell me stories of how they aren't allowed to talk at lunch because it would spread the virus, and instilling that level of germophobia in children.
And just making that, they weren't allowed to drink water. If you drank water, they made you stand in a corner and face the wall to have a sip of water. It was like a shame parade. It was just like it was horrible. Like, what a miserable experience.
Yeah.
That's just basic science.
You have to face the wall when you're drinking water. Now,
I mean, the only fun part about school is like the friends and the socializing. I mean, when I was in school, I hated school. I mean, I like PE and I sort of like English, but it's like the friends and the social part. Like, you're not going there because you literally love learning math, or I did not in any case.
Yeah, they made it a miserable experience. And for so many kids, I think you're totally right, Megan. School is so much more than the classes and the education. It's where your friends are. It's where you maybe get an encouraging word from a teacher in the hallway if you're having a bad day. I mean, it's your whole life.
Yeah.
When you're a kid, and to make it just utterly miserable, that is not conducive to learning. And I think a lot of kids, I mean, these two teenagers in Greeley, Colorado, once school opened, they just kept ditching. They felt like they'd missed so much. They hadn't seen their friends in a year, and they were just like, they kept saying, YOLO, fuck it. Like, they just didn't want to do it. And this is the other thing that we learned. And this is what I said was going to happen all along. And it is precisely what happened. And, chronic absenteeism is at an all-time high right now. We told kids that they didn't matter and school didn't matter, that their needs came last. That was the message we sent to children, because people were attending, people like Governor Gavin Newsom, football games with 60,000 people at SoFi Stadium, and 2-year-olds were masked in preschool the next day. So we told kids their education doesn't matter. Your needs don't matter. If you don't like this, you're a selfish jerk. That's what we told them. Yeah. So they heard us, and they're like, I'm not going back. They're not going back. We deprioritized it. We forced children to be human shields for the rest of us. And now they're like, school is not a priority. And the chronic absenteeism is a disaster. It's a generational catastrophe. It honestly is. That means they're absent more than 90%, more than 10% of the days. And that number of those who are chronically absent has doubled, and in some markets tripled, some cities tripled. So these kids aren't going to graduate, or if they do graduate because they're just being waved across the finish line, they're not going to have skills to hold a job.
Right.
It's bad.
Yeah.
And nothing's done. There's no, they should, all that COVID money that was supposed to go for ventilating the schools, which they didn't need, all they needed to do was open the door and open the window and let the kids in. That's what they did in Europe. There's all that money that wasn't spent. Why aren't we spending it? These kids need tutors year round. You should have summer school. You should have all of it. We should be doing a big program like a Teach for America type thing to get young people into the classrooms, energetic young people who have the energy to deal with some of these challenges. But nothing's happening. We're just accepting it.
I was so angry in Canada, in any case, at the teachers and the teachers' unions, because the teachers and the teachers' unions were stoked about the closures. Like, none of the teachers, never mind the unions just back whatever the NDP supports, or and the Liberal Party, but they acted like they were all in danger of dying, and the idea of them going back to school was like a risk to their lives. So of course they couldn't. And it's like, shut up. Like, you just want to stay home and get paid. Like, this is just easier for you. In
the US, they were marching in the streets holding coffins. Do you remember these?
Right.
Remember these pictures that like we were gonna, they were being forced to give their lives if they had children. I mean, it was such a joke. In San Francisco, and this is what put me over the edge. When the vaccine became available in January or February or whenever it was of 2020, certain people were sort of, allowed to go to the front of the line. So at first in San Francisco, that was not teachers, it was the elderly, which, given what we knew at the time, made sense. Now I don't know if it made sense, because I'm not sure it actually helped anyone, but that's like a story for another day. But then the teachers insisted we have to be first in line. Mm-hmm. So the Board of Ed and the teachers unions, they insisted, and they got to go to the front of the line. Then guess what happened?
They still wouldn't go back to teach.
They still wouldn't go back to school. They said, well, then we can't go until all the parents of the kids are vaccinated. And then it was until all the kids are vaccinated, because we all have, who knew there were, half the teachers in San Francisco or live with someone who is. So they just refused to go back. And then, of course, many of them were caught, taking photos from vacations and places.
Well, and they would speak about children as though they were filthy germ vectors, say all of these disparaging things about children. I knew from the very beginning, as soon as education was declared non-essential by the government, that we were in really, really dire straits.
Yeah. Yeah. There were so many things wrong. I'll never not be mad about it.
I know. I tried giving up for Lent, but it didn't work. I'm still.
Haley tried to give up being angry about COVID for Lent.
I won't. I think I should be mad about it. I think we all should be mad about it. It doesn't mean that I can't like live my life and be a happy person, but I think we should be mad about it, because if you're mad about it, then you'll make sure it never happens again. You'll keep fighting to make sure it never happens again.
Right. Yeah. No, it doesn't mean, I don't like walk around feeling enraged or anything like that. I'm a pretty like happy person. I like my life. But yeah, I mean, I think like, I don't think that it's actually good to forget about, because it was so wrong and so awful. And I think that we should kind of stay angry about it. So when do you know when the film will be out?
Well, it'll be done in probably 2 months. I would like to sell it, so I haven't done that yet. I'm hoping, a large mainstream streamer bites. I think they're still a little afraid of it. The ones I've reached out to are not willing to take the lead yet, but I'm going to keep trying.
Wow, it's really timely. I keep trying to find any data at all comparing the outcomes, like children's health outcomes and educational outcomes in the states that locked down so hard, like Oregon, California, New Mexico, versus South Dakota and Iowa. But I think with the only two states that kept the schools open, except for that initial 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think there's some decent studies out there that show, I won't be able to cite the statistics specifically, but the longer schools were closed, the more learning was lost. And there's another good one on Catholic schools, which did not close.
Wow.
And there was no learning loss when you look across Catholic schools across the country. I mean, it's sort of obvious, right?
Right. It's like, the classic study that showed that breastfeeding comforts babies. So now we know. Like, we have to do this study, but that is how the world runs. Like, people want data, and I don't know.
You're right.
Yeah,
you're right. But to go back to your earlier point, Megan, what was so frustrating throughout, of all the many things that were frustrating, all the people who think they're so smart, who were basically just listening to NPR and full blast and CNN, reading the death ticker and reading the ridiculous headlines in the New York Times and mocking people. Like, I was obsessed. I was reading every study that came out. I was reading the footnotes. I was reading the data, and they're like, ugh, they mock you for doing your own research. Right.
Yeah. Like, what are you listening to, Joe Rogan?
I was stupidly reading like the medical studies. But they mock you. You're ill-informed because you're not willing to buy the propaganda from NPR, which is unlistenable at this point. But I used to listen to, that's all I used to listen to.
I used to have it on all day long it was just my background. And now I can't listen for 5 minutes without being disgusted.
It's really the worst. It's worse than New York Times, and it's worse than CNN. Like, if I think those three, it's worse, because every once in a while, those other two will say something that's sort of reasonable. NPR never does. It's like, it's embarrassing. But I used to listen to it all the time. Anyway.
Yeah, that's the same situation with the CBC in Canada, which is that, like, I don't think I've listened to it in like 5 years now, but I mean, it's all propaganda. They're not doing any journalism. This is our state-funded media in Canada. And, I mean, what's funny, which I like, is that the media is pretty much falling apart in Canada. There was already not very much, the media landscape was very small in Canada, but everybody is getting laid off, and because, they're not doing anything useful. Like, what are they offering? Propaganda. Okay, so it's been about an hour and 50 minutes. I have no segue for this at all. It's just that I've been obsessed with it, and I just have to talk about it, which is this Andrew Huberman story that was just published in New York Magazine. And so, did either of you guys read it?
I read it.
Okay. So
I haven't read it. I was reading your Substack before I got on the phone, and I have almost nothing to say on the subject because I haven't read it and I barely know who he is. So I might take my leave because I think my daughter wants me to put her to bed now.
Sure. Yeah. You can check out if you need to check out. And yeah, I just published my piece on Substack like 5 minutes before we started the live stream. So there's probably typos in it. So I apologize to anyone who's like reading it. I put typos in every single thing I publish. I don't think I've ever published anything without typos. So I'm sure. Can
I just say one thing before I go? And I am going to go put my daughter to bed because I haven't seen her in a couple of days. I was in New York during the launch, but I'm obsessed with your Substack.
Thank you.
So I nearly peed my pants reading the Taylor Swift stuff, but you made me feel a little more footloose and fancy free because there are typos sometimes, but I like it because I'm like, she's just like going and she's just hitting send, and I'm like being such a weirdo and trying to be, and people don't care. Like
I do edit my pieces, believe it or not. It's just that I can't see. I'll read it over 3 times and publish it and then be like, how did I not see?
I know, but you can go back and change it, but it feels like you're just like letting it all out. And I'm not suggesting you don't edit. They're very, but it just doesn't feel sort of like overly, I don't know.
I do. I mean, that is how I write. Like I sort of write and like it's like my voice. Like I'm just like talking, right? And
inspired me. I'm trying
to. I mean, I love your Substack. So I'm
and how I write and just like get it out. So I love it, and you make me laugh every day when I read it. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I just like I've been getting more and more angry at the male heterodox community, and this response to the Andrew Huberman thing really pushed me over the edge. So I sort of have like called out. I don't like to call people out, but people who like I've been avoiding calling out because I like them and I like their work. But it's like these guys have like such a massive blind spot when it comes to women, and I can't stand it because these are the same people who purport to be like the truth tellers and I'm seeking truth, and we're all just being very rational and unbiased. And it's like you don't understand women at all, and you don't really seem to want to understand women, and you don't, when you talk about women, like you don't want to hear from women, you want to talk to other men about how women are and how men are. And I'm like, you can just hang around with women or ask.
Yeah, they just want to be the new experts, and they're the same as the old experts. And I mean, I get mad at them because they were all wrong about COVID.
Yes.
None of them will admit that they were wrong about COVID. I'm not going to name names, but you can maybe guess who. Only one has admitted that he was wrong and wasn't paying attention. The rest all insist they were right about everything, and you need to line up and do what they're telling you to do. And I'm like, you pride yourself on questioning the mainstream narratives pushed on us, and you fell for it, and you are still insisting you were right. So yeah, we can talk about that another day.
Definitely. Okay. Well, me and Mary Lou will dish on Andrew Huberman, and you can check out. But thank you so much for joining us. This was awesome.
It's nice to see you too. Good to talk to you guys.
And I just I put all the links to Jennifer's Substack and Twitter and to her new clothing line, which is XX-XY, down in the show notes if you're watching on YouTube. But if you're just listening, you're on Substack at Jennifer Sey, that's SEY, and then your website is Say Everything, and you're on Twitter at Jennifer Sey, and the website, I can't remember what your shorthand was that you just said, but it's also XX-XY Athetics.com.
The truth fits is much easier to remember, so try that.
Thank you. The truth fits.
Check it out.
Awesome. Great to see you. Thanks again.
Chatting ladies. Nice to see you both.
Okay. You too, Jennifer. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Okay. Now, I am glad that at least I got that little spiel out about how annoyed I am with all these like heterodox, truthy, and I think that Jennifer said that well, which is that they just want to be the new experts.
Right. And it's so frustrating though, watching hypocrisy on display. It's awful.
Well, and just they're so condescending. It's just also insulting to women. I feel like they all just insulted women. So, like, okay, so no, yeah, I mean, women are a bunch of dum-dums. Like, you don't. First of all, we're dumb because we don't understand men. Second of all, we're like kind of desperate and pathetic because we're all clamoring after these like high status, attractive, successful men. Of course they're going to cheat on us. Why would they just settle down with you like this 45? They're so rude and insulting to any woman who's like over 35. Basically, like your eggs are all dried up. Why would anybody want you? And then they just, nothing they say really aligns with my experience, but it doesn't occur to them that any experience outside their preferred world view, which, comes from evolutionary psychology and evolutionary biology. So, this is the way of the world. It's like, why you pretend to be so open-minded and so interested in, again, like interested in the truth, but you don't seem to be interested. Tell me what you thought about the piece.
Well, I barely have heard about this guy. The only reason I know who Andrew Huberman is some of my male patients reference him, and I know that he's, this life hacker influencer, but he has no influence over me. I've never listened to an entire episode of his podcast. But I know that guys are into him, and then, okay, so reading the piece, it was just, people said it was gratuitous and just a takedown of this guy, but I thought it was more an example of just pointing out hypocrisy in public figures, and I think that's an important task of the media. I don't think that that's frivolous.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the response was primarily, from what I saw, that it was just gossipy and why is this relevant? And it's totally gross and unfair for people to be delving into this guy's personal life, and his personal life doesn't have anything to do with his work. And Megan Wisdom in the comments just said, Huberman, whatever, hired a crisis management guy. Emma, it's okay, boo boo. Who she's crying about. Hired a crisis management guy who started feeding hit piece lines to all these guys, because that was another part of the narrative where all these guys started saying, "Oh, this is like a legacy media takedown of an independent guy because they're so threatened by these independent guys," which is true when it comes to Joe Rogan. So people have said that about like the CNN trying to attack Joe Rogan because they see him as a threat, because he is a threat, because, he has more listeners than all of them do. Right. But this is not the case with Huberman. And like Eric Weinstein said that he like implied that this was some kind of like FBI plot to take him down, and that it was, what was it? What word did he use? Image. It was something along the lines of, I wrote it in my piece, it like tarnishing his image. And I'm just like, this guy is not this powerful. Like, this guy is not Joe Rogan. This guy is not so powerful that the FBI or legacy media even feels so threatened by him that they have to write a story about how he treats women badly.
He's a tenured professor at Stanford, so he's not actually alternative. That's a legacy institution.
Right.
With a lot of, so he's got the power of the mainstream behind him. He's very wealthy and he's very influential. And as far as I know, his entire shtick is helping people gain control of their own impulses, right? Like,
yeah, that's a lot of it.
Yeah, right. And then to show that this guy has no control over his impulses and is actually erratic and dishonest and dangerous in his behavior, I don't think that that's gossipy. I think that it's again, the job of the media to do that work.
I mean, once you're a public figure, you are fair game to a certain extent. I don't like, it's tough because I don't think necessarily, like, I don't know if I care if some writer or musician has a shitty personal life. I think that the issue with this guy is that he professes to be striving for perfection, if not perfect in every way. He's very controlled and regimented about his body, his nutrition, his workouts, like his happiness, his mental health, and he's been in therapy for many, many years, and he presents himself as this totally like self-reflective, evolved guy. And so he's essentially helping, the guys who really love him and who follow him are guys who are also sort of trying to perfect themselves in that way. And I do find it interesting and hypocritical that this doesn't extend to their relationships with women. It's in every other facets of their life, but what they do in their relationships with women is irrelevant because women are irrelevant.
Well, I kept thinking when I was watching the men respond to it and be like, well, what's the big deal? That's just how men behave, and women are stupid if they expect men to not be, they expect men to be honest and kind and good people. And I kept thinking, well, what if there were an article of someone of this stature who had adopted dogs from the pound 6 different times, then treated them terribly, and then returned them to the pound where they might be killed? I think people would care more about that than the way this man is treating actual human beings.
Totally. I mean, it's just like, the responses were so dumb to me, which is ironic because all these guys were acting like these women were so dumb to have fallen for this. And, like, I'm sorry, but do you think that it would be a good thing if women operated, or anybody, but we're talking about women here, operated in a way where they were mistrustful of everyone? Like, I don't go into a relationship assuming that somebody's lying to me. Like, that would be a really weird thing to do. And that's actually the kind of thing that you do if you've been through a lot of trauma. Like, if you were like, if your parents really messed you up, or like you were abused or abandoned and you don't trust, then maybe you do go into relationships in a way where you don't want to be vulnerable and you think everybody's going to bail on you and you can't trust them and they're going to pull the rug out from under you. But like most people who are like normal, healthy people don't assume that other people are lying to them and cheating on them. So this idea that like, oh, these women are so stupid, of course there were clues. But, like even when there are clues in a relationship, you're inclined to believe your partner when they say, oh, no, actually, this is what's going on. It wasn't like he was obviously very good at convincing these women that he was committed to them, that there were no other women, that he really was committed to working on things, and that, again, that he was really evolved. And like, I just, and I just think that it's like these guys are actually, to me, making themselves look really dumb by not understanding how humans operate, first of all, and by pretending as though they don't understand that this guy was behaving in really kind of a diabolical way as far as I was concerned.
Absolutely. And given the fact that this guy is a neuroscientist whose his entire fame stems from his ability to understand and explain how dopamine works, how oxytocin works, how human reinforcement in behavior works, to think that he wasn't a psychopath and intentionally setting these women up and intentionally conning them, that's naive, right? Like how they can't see that this guy has sociopathic tendencies. He obviously was stringing these women along and probably using his understanding of human psychology to do that. And that's creepy. It's dangerous, and it's not worthy of respect.
No, I mean, right away, when I read the piece, I was like, this guy is a psychopath. And I'm not saying that, I mean, people don't understand necessarily what you mean when you say psychopath. I just mean like he's exhibiting the traits of a psychopath. I don't mean that he's a serial killer necessarily. But like, a narcissist and a psychopath, like these kinds of this like really intentional, like most normal people, I don't think can live their lives in that way, where they're living, not just a double life, but he was lying to, in the piece, there were 6 different women. So I'm sure there were many more than that over years. He was constantly juggling a whole bunch of women and a whole bunch of lies. And most normal people would find that very stressful, but, he obviously got enjoyment out of that. And, again, a lot of these guys who were responding online were like joking, like, oh, like, a hot, successful guy hooking up with a lot of chicks, like, duh. But it wasn't like that. It wasn't like, oh, you're just a guy and you're out at the bar meeting a bunch of women and you're going home with them. It was that he was maintaining relationships for years on end, where he was intentionally making those women think that he was committed to having a family. You know, he was going through IVF treatments with this Sarah. They called her Sarah. These women were all anonymous. That was another criticism. You know, and then also at the same time dating these other women and giving them the impression that he was also committed to relationships with them. You know, it is psychopathic behavior. And I would argue too that it's emotionally or psychologically abusive to gaslight people in this way. Like, because these women would get clues and they'd be like, wait a minute, do you have, like, one of them heard him say on Rogan that he had a girlfriend. And she was like, wait, do you have a girlfriend, like, beyond me? Like, who are you talking about? I don't know how casually they were dating. And he was like, oh, no. And he did have a girlfriend. But you know, he was like, no, I have so many stalkers. This is another thing that narcissists will say all the time. Oh, like, all these women, they're so crazy. They're just throwing themselves at me. I can't get rid of them. All these women are stalking me. And so he told this woman, Eve, I don't think that was her real name either. I'm not sure. Oh, I have stalkers, so I have to pretend to have a girlfriend to just keep all these clamoring women off me. And the men responding just seemed thrilled at this idea. Like, it's like he's their fantasy.
Right. They aspire to be him, even to the point of defending this as normal behavior. And I haven't seen any directly say they want to behave that way too, that they'd love to string 6+ women along in completely dishonest, emotionally abusive ways. But that is what they're saying indirectly, right? They're like, well, what man wouldn't behave that way if he was that famous and fit and that much of an alpha? And that is really a distressing confession on their part.
I think so too. And I don't actually think that most men do want to behave like that. I think that what men fantasize about is that they're such hot, attractive, successful men that they can kind of do whatever they want and get away with it and not be held accountable for it. And that all these hot women are throwing themselves at them. But I think that in real life, most men would prefer to have a relationship and maybe like dalliances here and there, but, you know, to actually manage that many different relationships, again, would be very stressful. And I think most men probably would like to be more relaxed and secure in their lives. But I think that I think on one hand, probably they don't want to let go of the fantasy that they have of Andrew Huberman because he's this guy that they look up to so much, like almost in sort of an older brother. Like he's like the cool older brother. He's the football player and he gets all the cheerleaders and like, gosh, he's so great. And maybe we can all be like him if we drink athletic greens and get sunlight in the morning, whatever, make our workouts as efficient as possible. But then, yeah, like this sort of other kind of, I don't know, alpha male fantasy of being able to pull in any chick that you want. And I think, I don't know, and I think that's connected to this other weird fantasy that they have where there's all these desperate 40-something women who are like clamoring for men and nobody wants them because they're wrinkly and old and used. And you know, like the dating scene, it's like all the 45-year-old guys are dating 25-year-old chicks, and so all these 45-year-old women have no one to date, and that's just not fucking true. It's not fucking true. And like, I can't defend myself on this basis on Twitter because then a bunch of like 18-year-olds in their mother's basements make fun of me and call me old. But like, it's just not everything's fine. Like, first of all, you're not desperate when I mean, hopefully by the time you're in your 40s, you're not desperate for male attention anymore. So it doesn't really matter if you're getting that kind of attention that you liked or wanted when you were 20. I certainly don't care. But also you're meeting people as human beings, and human beings like each other. It's not, there's no man who cares about my age. I get hit on by 25-year-olds all the time, as well as men my own age.
Well, okay, and that double standard of why isn't anyone in that sphere criticizing the fact this is a 48-year-old graying man who hasn't settled down, he doesn't have kids? Why isn't he being called a perpetual adolescent? Why isn't he being called out of like he fell for the lies of his age and didn't settle down early? Instead, he's still held up as this man to emulate, where it's like it's not good to wait till you're 48 to have kids as a man. Like, that greatly increases your offspring's autism risk. It greatly increases your offspring's risk of losing a father at a young age. Like, this is not he's not modeling healthy relationships and healthy societal behavior. And that these guys, especially, I'm so disappointed in Rob Henderson, can't turn their usually critical lens on his behavior and see that he's a terrible role model.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other thing, that it's like, if you're invested in trying to make men better and men's lives better, should this be the role model, a 48-year-old man who's still screwing around like a teenager, and like who and all these men are also the kind of guys who are going to say like the nuclear family is really important. Did I just say that wrong?
No, you could say it.
I'm every time I say nuclear, I'm like nuclear, and then I know that that's like a big joke of people who are too stupid to know the difference. But I am that person, just so everyone knows. And to have kids, and they reinforce the importance, and this is legit, of the man staying with the family and being committed to the family. The importance of having a father figure around, like how terrible and awful single moms are. And then this is the guy that's your role model?
Exactly. And this is the kind of behavior that creates fatherless children, to be sleeping with 6 women at once and telling them all you're being monogamous with them. It's it's really distressing to me to see so many men. And Mary Harrington was defending him too, and saying this is just our society taking down another male role model. Like, why do we have to? Why are people invested in bringing down the strong male role models? And his behavior exemplifies all of her critiques of the sexual revolution and how it's been destructive to society. And she's still defending the guy.
I mean, there's a lot of people who clearly didn't read the piece and announced on Twitter that they hadn't read the piece, but they were defending Andrew Huberman, and they thought it was disgusting that he was being taken down in this way, and cancel culture, yada, yada, yada. Like, first of all, like, I think I would have thought twice about saying something if I legitimately thought that, he was at risk of being taken down by cancel culture. But I do not think that cancel culture exists in the same way that it once did. I think he's fine. I think all of his fans are sticking around. I think his podcast is going to be fine. I think his career is fine. I think his reputation is going to be fine with all the people that matter to him who are not us.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. When we weren't his fan base anyway, I think he's going to be fine. He'll probably be strengthened by this. I mean, men usually aren't ruined by their cancellations. Think of, like, who was it, Louis C.K., who all those women said he was literally like jerking off in front of them during job interviews and things, and he's not even canceled. Like,
I'm a Louis C.K. stan, so I support him not being canceled. But I mean, there were men who really legitimately did get screwed by cancel culture. Like, there was a guy, I included this in my piece, Stephen Galloway in Vancouver, who was accused of abuse, and it was never corroborated, but his whole career was basically ruined. And I know some other people that's happened to. Some of them have been able to come back since. But that kind of stuff, I think, is really terrible. But like, it's just, we're having a conversation about something that's real. And the reason that I think that some women, a lot of women played cool girl and were like, did the same thing that these guys were doing, that like, oh, big deal. So he has a bunch of girlfriends. Of course he has a bunch of girlfriends. He's so cool. But, there's also women who recognize these kinds of behaviors because they've been with guys like this and realized after that these guys are narcissists or psychopaths or whatever, And maybe these guys weren't violent, or maybe they were violent. I think that most abusive men have narcissistic or psychopathic traits. So it is dangerous, and it is to a woman's benefit to be able to recognize these kinds of patterns. But like, you know,
Right.
men don't, why would a man care if another man acted like this? Like, it's not, this kind of behavior isn't a threat to men. So it, you know, like, is very easy for them to brush it off and to defend their bro essentially from cancel culture, being Me Too'd or whatever. And they're bolstered by the fact that Me Too is over, and we recognize that a lot of it was kind of stupid at this point, and that now there's, you know, we've come full circle from feminism being this trendy thing where every celebrity wanted to wear a t-shirt that says this is what a feminist looks like, to feminism being to blame for everything. So it's perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, I keep again coming back to the fact that nobody cares if the subject is abusing women. Like, it's just, it really, like, I keep thinking, well, if he'd been outed as being a hypocrite in some other area, like maybe, I don't know, maybe like found to be eating all this junk food or all the things that he says he doesn't do, like, or if he were mentally abusing young male fans of his and sucking them into relationships and then completely encouraging them to do dangerous things to their bodies, like IVF, like he was pushing one of these women to do IVF, which is really bad for women. And
he was giving her the shots on their camping trip
like,
while he was texting other women about how sexy they were.
And the whole giving her the shots had a real S&M vibe to it, to me, of just this really sadistic, like painful sexual, you know, just sexual practice. Not to mention the psychological abuse of telling a woman that, you know, you're not infertile, but we can't just trust you to conceive and have it be all out of control and in the mysterious female body. We got to do it in a lab because that's science. And to put her through these, like, you know, literally sometimes life-threatening, always painful and degrading processes. If he had done something similarly degrading and dangerous outside of the context of a heterosexual sexual relationship, people would not be okay with it. But when it's within the realm of male-female sexuality, men will excuse anything.
You know who got canceled in the manosphere is this guy called the Liver King.
The Liver King got canceled?
He got canceled because they found out that he was actually taking testosterone, and he'd been lying about it, and his bod was not au naturel, and they canceled him. So this is the kind of thing that gets you canceled in the manosphere. So it's like, you were actually taking testosterone and you weren't, like, we're done with you. But how they treat women, like real actual human beings in real life, is totally irrelevant to whether or not they should be respected or taken seriously or not viewed as a hypocrite or whatever.
Yeah, who cares? Every man would have a harem and be a liar and you know, do terrible things to women if he had the chance. You know, that's just men. And if women don't understand that, what did Rob Henderson say? That they can't put an 8-piece puzzle together. You know? So that statement of just, oh, women are stupid. They're just stupid if they expect men to be well behaved and kind and nice.
It's so out of touch. Like, it's so, the argument from these guys is that, like, oh, you know, like, women just don't understand how men operate or how human relationships work. You know, they don't understand how, you know, the rules of the dating scene work and blah, 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 blah. But, like, you know, they also treat women who stay in abusive relationships as though, you know, well, it's kind of your fault because you knew that he was abusive and you stayed. And women do this too. So, you know, it's not all men. Like, women who don't understand the dynamics of an abusive relationship, same thing, will be like, well, you know, you chose to stay. And, you know, those relationships are really complicated, and very smart women struggle to leave abusive relationships for a wide variety of reasons, including, of course, that they're afraid of retaliation, because often abusive men, you know, when women get killed, it's when they leave. When their kids get killed, it's when they leave. and you have to be quite careful and strategic about it, and it often takes women a really long time to leave. But again, because you want to believe people, and you do believe people when they make promises to you. Emma, you can go out by yourself, the door's open. Sorry, I was over there whining. You like, why would you disbelieve somebody who convinced you, like, I am changing, like I'm going to therapy and I'm doing all these things and I'm really sorry and I want things to be different? After a certain point, you're like, okay, yeah, I've heard this before. I don't believe it anymore. But, that often it takes at least a few tries. You're suggesting that people be so much more cynical than I think that you actually want people to be. Like, do you want people to think that men can't change and that you can't give men another chance? Or that, the way that a person once was and how they always will be. And, often that's true, but I don't actually think that's how we should necessarily treat other human beings.
I just don't understand how these men think we're going to get to their goal of a society where children are raised in healthy two-parent stable families if they're elevating men like this as role models. And just keep coming back to that. There's so many facets to it. There's also the aspect of this guy, again, who's a neuroscientist whose whole shtick is telling people how to have physically and mentally healthier lives, right? Is addicted to dishonesty and to sneaking around, and addicted to the thrill of risky sexual behaviors. And all of that matters as much as it would if we found out he was driving drunk frequently, or if he was doing something else that put people's lives at risk. But because it's male-female sexual relationships, we're supposed to just, well, that's just how the world works. That's just, it's not like he hurt actual humans.
Well, and I hate to say it because I've been trying to stop sounding like a feminist because I know how annoying it is. But, like, it is sort of about maintaining male dominance. It's like, well, this guy is a dominant male. So, of course, he engages in these behaviors. And, of course, these behaviors are defensive. And, of course, we're going to rally around him because, in fact, we do see ourselves as the dominant sex. And we are invested in maintaining that. And we do think that it's natural. And women are kind of like pathetic and less than, and, you just end up like, it's like, you want to differentiate yourself from, or I don't know, maybe they don't want to differentiate themselves from the sort of MRA red pill. I always say red pill, but I feel like I've been red pilled in some ways. So I don't think it's the right term to use because I don't want to be critical of people who've been red pilled per se. But this sort of like online community of men who's very embittered at women, to the point of feeling like they hate women because they're not getting the porny looking chick that they feel that they're entitled to, despite the fact that they aren't really offering much of anything. But these guys are a different type though. But Joe in the comments just said, abuse is the main thing. And this always bothers me too. Abuse is the main thing that conservatives leave out when discussing marriage. And it basically negates their whole stance, which is like, all of these guys and women too are arguing for these traditional marriages and traditional families because that's the healthiest thing for men, the healthiest thing for women, the healthiest thing for kids. But they pretend as though there aren't a lot of, abusive men out there. And, that's not healthy for kids. It's not, I don't believe that it's healthier for kids to just have a dad if that dad is abusive, whether it's towards the kids or just towards the mom, like whether they're role modeling that behavior, like this is how you treat women and it's okay to disrespect women or it's okay to be violent towards women. Like that's not inherently a healthier model than just having a single mom around and no father, in my opinion, because the mom left the guy because he was abusive.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, abuse is this, it's really swept under the rug, and it's a public health disaster. Domestic violence is the single biggest cause of maternal mortality in the United States. That big study just came out showing that we've been blaming the obstetric system, and I have a lot of critiques about the obstetric system for so many women dying during childbirth and right afterwards. But really, maternal mortality is death from any cause during pregnancy or in the first few weeks after pregnancy. And the single biggest cause of death getting recorded as maternal mortality is intimate partner violence. That's what's killing mothers. That's what's killing pregnant women and postpartum mothers. This is a public health disaster. And because it's just women, nobody cares. It's not actually happening to human beings. It's just happening to women in the context of heterosexual relationships. And it's it's so frustrating. And this guy's behavior is the behavior of an abuser, and these guys do hurt and kill women.
It is the behavior of an abuser. It's you're lacking in any empathy, whatever, any compassion for these people. You're completely selfish. Again, completely narcissistic. Sorry about the dog barking sounds in the background. And I mean, it's sadistic, I think, in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean, is this the kind of guy that would make a good husband and a good father and stick around to raise his kids? Of course not.
No, and I kind of feel like the subtext of so many of these heterodox people defending him was, being, happy marriages are for beta cucks, right? Like that's kind of what they're saying.
Right. Yeah. You should of course your man's going to cheat on you and you should just live with it and be a good little wife.
I know, totally. And it's no different than there was this hysterical line from The Simpsons back in the 90s where one of the characters says, "You love your wife? That's so gay."
I mean, I love that. I remember that. I was watching a clip of Andrew Huberman and Lex Friedman talk about, good marriages and what would make a good relationship and what would make a good marriage. And, neither of them know because neither of them are in long-term relationships or marriages, but they were like, well, I look towards my friends who are in happy, good marriages, like our friend Joe Rogan, which is true, he's in a good marriage. He's been married for a long time. He's a really good husband. He's a really good dad. He's, invested in family, but it's you guys aren't, that's a lie. He's not a model to you at all based on your behavior. That doesn't align with his behavior or ethics at all. So I don't know. I mean, if you're bullshitting people to make money and while you're presenting yourself as an expert on all these things, none of us are perfect. I don't want to, I've done lots of bad things in my life, lots and lots of bad things. I've cheated, I've been cheated on, I've done things that I regret for sure. I say mean things all the time, but it's not, I don't think that I'm presenting myself as a perfect person, and I'm certainly not going out of my way to hurt people. I wouldn't have an ongoing affair while I was in a committed relationship while lying to both people about not being in a relationship with anybody else, and then also text and this just being this is his life. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't I accidentally just fell in love with somebody else, or even I accidentally hooked. That stuff happens. Yeah. It's totally human. No, it's not great, but it's human and it makes sense usually. But this is his intentional chosen lifestyle and pattern of behavior, and he doesn't care at all about how it's not like the rest of us where we would feel bad. We'd feel bad when we hurt the feelings of somebody that we leave or we cheat on or whatever. Right. He clearly doesn't feel bad. I think I get the impression, because he keeps doing it, that he thinks it's great. And I also get the impression that all these guys think it's great.
it's just how men behave, and women need to accept that. But also, women are terrible if they end up being single mothers and not
Right.
raising children with men.
I mean, they're dissing themselves, which is weird because they're first of all playing dumb, and then they're saying that men aren't ethical and can't make choices. Like, well, you know, like are you controlled by your dick then, and you're not rational? Then you don't get to say that you're rational and that women are so irrational because you're telling me that that's not true.
Mhm.
Anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, it's been frustrating watching it, and frustrating watching people who I you know, often respect. Again, the reason I'm so upset about Rob Henderson and Mary Harrington is these are people who I think are often really brilliant and have
Definitely.
excellent analyses on our society, and that they're missing the whole point of this is horrifying to me.
It was weird. Rob's response was really surprising to me because I think he's awesome, and I think his book is great, and I like pretty much everything that he writes. I think he's a super smart and a super ethical guy, and I was surprised that he didn't really seem to get this, and that the position again seemed to be kind of like, how could these women not have known? Of course they knew, and this man is in basically a position of power in the dating scene, so why wouldn't he operate like this? You know, women in the dating scene at this age are not in a position of power, so, you know, of course they have to expect that, you know, the top man is gonna act like this, and they all know that's not true, again, because like we can look to, there are good guys who are very successful and very good looking guys who are good fathers and good husbands. There's lots of bad ones too, but it's just, you know, this is not inevitable. This is still a choice.
Right. Anyway, yeah.
I'm so glad that we got to talk about that in any case, because I was just like, what happening? I was just gonna end up, you know, tweeting about it all night if we didn't talk about it.
And it's so timely because by next week it's just going to be some new scandal or some new
of course
piece dropping.
Anyway, thanks for talking about that with me, and thank you for joining us, and thanks everyone for tuning in. We are here every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern, 7 p.m. Mexico time, and now New Mexico time. And you guys, Mary Lou is on Substack. You should subscribe to her Substack. It's great. She's at Mary Lou Singleton on Substack, and her website is enchantedfamilymedicine.com. She has another podcast called How I Healed, which you can subscribe to on all of the podcast apps. And she's on Twitter at ML_Singleton. You guys can all read what I wrote about Huberman. It's quite long, and I apologize. I'm going to go back right now and make sure that I didn't miss any typos. If you find them, let me know. I don't have an editor. It's just me and the dogs here. So, and I put that link in the live chat, but it's also at meganmurphy.ca. And I hope that people will become paid subscribers over there, because that's pretty much the main thing that supports my work. I don't have any private funders, and alas, I've not yet found a rich husband to support me. I have never looked for one, but you know, I sadly, I'm living my saddest life over here, clearly. And like and subscribe to the YouTube channel if you're watching on YouTube, so that you catch all of our live streams. Is there anything else that you would like to say or that we need to say?
No, I think that's it. We'll see you next week.
Okay. See everybody next week. Bye. Good night.